conflict management. And our objectives are going to be to understand the positive and negative aspects of conflict and to learn strategies to be able to manage conflict successfully. We know that if there is conflict, then there's something that's just not working. So there's an issue that we want to address so that we can correct it and learn from it, improve by it, and help the conflict to go away. But the thing to keep in mind is that conflict is a natural part of daily life. It's always going to be in our lives, and it can be a good thing as well. We know that conflict is not a communication breakdown. And like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And so it isn't something that we need to avoid. Nor is it a sign that people can't get along, or that if it's an interpersonal relationship, that the relationship is doomed. But it's a challenge for us to overcome, to address, and to overcome successfully. We know that communication plays a big part in conflict. Sometimes conflict can arise because people are not really communicating. They're not talking and expressing their wants and needs or addressing an issue that may come up. But we know that conflict can also create communication. The way that it creates communication is that it's a vehicle that may force someone to talk about a certain issue to make sure that it is addressed. The communication can also reflect the conflict. So you may be able to tell that there's a conflict or something going on by the tone of one's voice, or definitely by the words that they use. So. And the other thing to remember in communication is it's our body language as well. So we may be saying one thing and using a tone that wouldn't give away that we're upset, but our body language is actually telling how we're feeling. So when we think about communication, we always have to keep our body language in mind because it is a vital part of it. Communication, again, it's the vehicle, the way that we handle the particular issue at hand. We can handle it in a constructive manner and be more likely to have a positive outcome, or if we handle it, the words that we use, the body language that we use, our tone, we can cause it to be a more of a destructive situation. But our goal here is to be able to manage conflict such that it creates new ideas, that we learn from it, that we grow from it. It may create a vision for an organization or a vision for a couple, because we can have conflict either interpersonally or in our work. But let's remember the importance of listening, because listening can be just something that we learn from. And we want to make sure that we are distinguishing listening from hearing. Hearing can be just something accidental. I can walk by someone and hear their conversation. But if I am engaged in conversation with an individual, I really want to truly listen to what he or she has to say, especially if there is some type of conflict, no matter how mild or how major. I want to be able to hear what they're saying. I also want to be able to take a look at their body language and to hear what their body is telling me as well. Because once we're able to truly hear and understand what the issue is, then we're better able to respond to it. We're better able to manage that conflict. Because if we're truly listening, we're going to be able to paraphrase back to the person what they're saying to make sure that we are understanding what it is that they're saying. Because so often in our conversations, someone may say something to us and we may interpret it in a way that may not exactly have been the way that they meant it. So if we're able to paraphrase that back to them, then we can clarify that and clarify any confusion that may have resulted. So what are some of the causes of conflict? Well, for these bears out in the wild, it could be a territorial, it could be a mate, it could be food, but for humans, conflict can arise out of anything that leads to a disagreement, such as if it's in an organization, it could be the organizational structure that could cause some conflict between staff, between employees. There could be a conflict over limited resources. This is something that can apply at work, but it can also apply in our daily lives. When we think about resources, money is a resource, and it can be a huge source of strife and conflict in a family, in a relationship. Housing can definitely be a resource that can cause conflict over. Perceptions and personality differences. Sometimes when people are together, they have certain personality traits that may not be tolerated easily by another individual, and so this could definitely lead to some conflict. Incompatible differences is something else that can certainly lead to conflict. Individuals may have different ideas about things. They may have different values about something, and if those values or ideas are kind of set in stone, so to speak, and are unchangeable, then it could lead to some incompatibility. And in not only in a relationship, maybe perhaps leading to separation or divorce, but it could also lead to some incompatibility with a job. When we're employed, we need to be able to work in a position that we enjoy and for an organization that we respect. If our personal values differ from those of the organization, then that can take a toll on our emotional health and even on our physical health. So incompatibility can really lead to some major issues and some major conflict, even if, well, I shouldn't say even if, but it can be internal conflict within ourselves. If there is task interdependence, so let's say that we have a team working on a particular task at work, and one member of the team isn't holding up his or her end, or they may be late on turning in something, and that could delay the entire project, which will impact the whole team and ultimately impact the organization, because we have deadlines, for a reason. Or let's say that we have a family, and we have the parent who needs the child to complete his or her chores. Let's say the chore is taking the trash out. Well, the parent needs for the child to take the trash out on time, so that if it's picked up at the side of the road, it'll be out there and ready in time. So if there's task interdependence and something isn't accomplished as it needs to be, there can certainly be conflict there. And depending upon how we handle the conflict could potentially escalate. Again, communication problems, I mentioned that just a little bit before. If there is communication problems or a communication breakdown, that will most certainly cause conflict, regardless of what the situation is. So we need full, open, honest, respectful communication at all times to be able to help alleviate problems from the beginning, as well as to be able to manage conflict and issues that may arise. Is conflict always bad? We touched on this just a little bit, but no, it doesn't have to be bad. It isn't always bad. Conflict can actually lead to new ideas and to creativity. Let's say we have a problem and we have an issue at work. There may be different ideas about how to approach that issue, how to address that issue. And depending on the personality types, that could certainly raise some conflict, and the conflict could potentially escalate. But once it's resolved out of that conflict, we may have a new way of doing things. We may have a new thought process. All types of creativity can arise whenever you put multiple minds together and look at things from different points of view. So again, as we noted earlier, it can lead to communication. It can even lead to better communication. When we work through our issues and conflicts in a relationship, whether it be a working relationship or a personal relationship, it can strengthen the relationship. If it is a really bad situation, it could potentially tear the relationship apart. But more often than not, if we are successful in managing the conflict, then it's going to be able to strengthen that relationship. And the same with a team. It can bring intergroup cohesiveness together in that team. If they have one conflict, one issue that they're working on, and everybody is engaged in trying to resolve that issue, then they all have that common goal. And they're all going to work together on that. So they become, just naturally, they become more cohesive. And it can also increase productivity in doing that. There have been many times when new, better business management ideas have also come out of conflict in, let's say, the boardroom, for lack of a better term. So conflict isn't always bad. But can it cause challenges? Absolutely, it certainly can. Conflict, especially if there isn't really good communication, can lead to misunderstandings. It can harm relationships. In employment situations, conflict can harm morale in major sort of ways. And we know that if morale is low in an organization, then productivity is, generally speaking, productivity is going to fall. And if productivity falls, then your organization becomes at risk. Also, conflict, some of the challenges with it are increased stress for any and all involved with a conflict. It has the potential for that, and we know that the more stress that we have, it impacts us both psychologically but physically as well. And that goes creates a vicious cycle, especially in an employment situation, because if you have a lot of conflict, a lot of morale issues, and you have someone who is really stressed out, that person, their health could sacrifice, and they could be missing work. They could, their productivity could suffer, or heaven forbid, they could come in and there be a mass shooting. Unfortunately, we see violence resulting out of conflict far too often nowadays. We hear it on the news almost, if not every single day. And it can also create a climate of mistrust. So the University of Minnesota offers some information about these challenges in far more detail than what we're able to go into here. There are unproductive ways, as we know, to manage conflict. Absolutely unproductive. Those dirty fighting techniques are something that we want to avoid. If we have a situation or a mindset where we want to win no matter what, then maybe we're willing to do whatever it takes to win that argument, to win that fight. And when that happens, then it's definitely going to have a negative outcome, and usually a large negative outcome for one or more of the parties that are involved. What we're looking for is a win-win. We're looking for a positive resolution to conflict, and we want to be able to manage it such that we're able to achieve that positive outcome. Alcohol and drugs, again, Those are ways that some people choose to, that some people cope with issues and cope with conflict. However, that can lead to another entirely other set of issues. Um, it in families and relationships, sometimes the children are used as pawns in the relationship, and that can not only cause bigger problems within the relationship, but it can also cause negative emotional outcomes for that child. So we don't want to involve our children in our conflicts between one another in relationships. We want to be able to resolve those between us, and there are many different things that can happen there. Sometimes if there's a conflict or a disagreement, when all of our emotions come into play, we may react based on our emotions instead of on our logical and critical thinking, and that can lead to some negative outcomes and unproductive ways of handling conflict. It can lead to grudges, to resentment later on. Even fear and violence can happen, as we noted earlier with conflict. So which way do we go? We want to manage the chaos. We want to bring order out of the chaos. We want to keep that conflict positive. And as you can see from the quote here, whenever you're in conflict with someone, there's one factor that can make the difference between damaging your relationship and keeping it. And that factor is attitude. I love that quote because it is absolutely correct. Our attitude can make or break a conflict situation. If we go into the conflict with the attitude of it's my way or the highway, with the attitude that I'm right and you're wrong, or no one else's opinion matters, then we're going to be very authoritative in that type of conflict resolution, and we're going to be very closed-minded in that conflict resolution. So that being said, the conflict may be one that doesn't resolve, or it may be one that someone totally compromises completely as a form of conflict resolution, which we'll talk more about here in a few moments. And in the long run, that can lead to resentment and anger, and it can destroy a relationship. So how do we manage conflict? How do we manage the strife and to prevent these negative outcomes? Well, one of the ways is through motivation, motivational interviewing. I remember I had a colleague who would always ask me, well, what's in it for me? What is in it for me? When I would try to get this colleague to do something or to think about something in a different way, the words that always came to mind was, what's in it for me? So I thought about that, and when we are trying to persuade someone, when we're trying to motivate someone, if we can help them to understand how they benefit from it, then we're far more likely to get buy-in about the situation or the issue at hand. Do we need to give some type of an incentive? So if it is an employment situation, do we need to give our staff an incentive of some sort? And those incentives could be a multitude of things. They could be monetarily, but they don't have to be monetarily. It could be a little more flexibility. It could be a simple pat on the back, or telling someone they did a great job. So we want to take that challenge and we want to develop a positive solution to it. We want to help motivate individuals so that we can reach our goals, whether it be at work, whether it be interpersonal, or if we're in the helping profession, be able to help motivate our clients or our patients that we're working with to help them be better able to succeed. And it kind of falls back on change management. So, where is the person in their realm of their readiness to change? If we can ascertain that and we can help them understand how the change will benefit him or her, then it will go a long way in being able to positively resolve any type of conflict that there may be. And in doing so, I heard a wonderful acronym this morning, darn cat. And in doing so, it's kind of it's related to change talk. Talks about the desire, the ability, and the reason behind the change. And then we look at the need of the individual. We look at their commitment to the change, and then we help figure out what kind of, or help them to figure out what kind of action they may need and what kind of action steps that they may need to take to be able to achieve the issue so that they can address the conflict. So let's say that we're working with an individual in a therapy session or in a coaching session or a peer support session. Let's say we're working with an individual who wants to go back to work, and he or she, if they have been out of work for quite some time, may be a little bit fearful. They may feel a little inadequate about their skills. And so, we can talk to them and ask them what do they want? What is their desired outcome? Maybe we want to write that down or have them to write that down. And then, depending upon the outcome, the job that they want, well, do they have the skills already in place to perform that job, or do they need to get some skills? And if they need to get some skills, okay, let's break that down. How do we help them get connected with the appropriate resources? What resources and support can we offer to them? But again, putting it back into their hands so that they are able to actually take the action steps, and not us taking the action steps for them, so that they can be able to figure out what the need is and to take steps to resolve whatever the need is. It's really the same steps involved in conflict resolution. We need to find out what the conflict is, what the desire is of the parties that are involved, what are their ability to address the issue. Is there some resource that we can help supply them with that may help them to address the issue? For instance, if it's homelessness and we're working with an individual, then perhaps that we can connect them with some local agencies or organizations that would be able to help them find funding to be able to find housing of some sort. If it is an employment situation, then do they actually have the resources that they need to be able to complete the task at hand? The other day I was having some issues with my laptop, so and because of that, I wasn't able to complete a presentation on time. So do our staff have the resources that they need in order to be able to address the issue and to help move past the conflict? Or maybe if we can address any resource issues early enough, then perhaps we can avoid a conflict altogether. So it's really going back to motivation. What is in it for me? And our ability to manage that for the individuals involved in the conflict, as long as we are a part of that conflict in some way, shape, or form. Conflict management styles. Now, I have heard for many years, and I'm sure that you have as well, that there are 5 conflict management styles, 5 ways that we all handle conflict, and that they're due to our personality and our life experiences, that we are more likely to fall into one of the 5 types. But we use all 5 types from time to time depending upon the situation. Some of the types, such as avoiding, when we first hear about that, we may think of, oh, that's not healthy, we shouldn't do that. Or competing, oh, that's not a good way to do. You don't want to compete constantly with people. Or if you're accommodating, then you're always giving in. So let's take a look at these and talk about them in a little bit more detail. Avoidance, that elephant in the room. Are we trying to completely avoid a situation or an issue? And if so, okay, why? Let's break that down a little bit. Well, first of all, is it really an issue? If someone comes to us upset about something, is it really an issue? Is it something that they have going on with them personally that they're trying to bring us into, or that they're trying to make an issue out of when it really isn't there? So, how should we best respond? If it's something that really isn't an issue, then if we feed into that, then it could grow and it could spiral. So perhaps it may be better that we avoid feeding into that. Let's say you have a child who is throwing a temper tantrum, and they're throwing the temper tantrum not because of something that they truly need, not because of a safety issue, a health issue. They're just throwing a temper tantrum, we'll say. So how do we best respond to that as parents? Do we really feed into it and give them a lot of attention while they're doing that? Or do we utilize another strategy and just, and try to diffuse the situation, try not to give it a lot of attention, try not to let it escalate? That's one time that avoidance may be appropriate. So there may be a situation where someone comes to us all of a sudden. There's a conflict. Maybe this is the first we've heard about it. Maybe we just don't know how we want to respond, or maybe we don't know enough about the situation, and we need some time to process. We need some time to process, 1, how we were approached, 2, what the issue is, 3, maybe we need to some time to actually look into it and to do some research. Maybe we need to some time to think about what we want out of this issue, what we want out of this conflict, or what our needs are in addressing this conflict. So maybe we don't want to engage actively in trying to resolve the conflict at this moment. Maybe we want to just take a moment and step back and kind of take a breath and clear our heads and figure some things out before we re-engage in the conflict. Now, if there's legal issues involved in the conflict, perhaps our attorneys are telling us, okay, say nothing, don't engage, don't talk about it. Maybe we're legally bound by confidentiality that we can't talk about it. Let's say that we're treating someone and we have a family member or a friend or an employer come to us and and demand that we tell them about this person's, let's just use an example, this person's health. Okay, let's say that they have a substance use disorder and they've been out of work and their employer calls us and said, okay, I need so and so back at work. How's he doing? Well, we are bound by confidentiality. Maybe, when we are not able to explain, not able to tell and answer the employer as they want to be, perhaps the employer's emotions come into play and the conversation gets a little bit heated. This may be far more likely of a situation, if it's a relative or a family that we're not able to answer their questions on, but we're legally bound by confidentiality. We can't. And not to mention, our ethics. We don't want to betray someone's trust. So again, even if it becomes a conflict, it's not necessarily a conflict that we can engage in. Sometimes people go to the media with complaints on organizations. And here again, that's a conflict, but how do we handle that conflict? Do we go on the media and state our case, or do we avoid addressing the conflict at that time? So there are times when avoidance may be the best way to manage that conflict. I've often heard there's a time and a place, and maybe this is not the time or the place to address the conflict. Again, we want to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing is not going to escalate the situation. So let's say that we're in the middle of the grocery store and somebody is mad at us and they see us and they come up to us and they really light into us. Being in the middle of the grocery store is neither the time nor the place to address the conflict. Okay, so we use avoidance at that point. Why should we not use avoidance, or when should we not use avoidance? Well, if it's in a work environment and we're avoiding a conflict, it could give off the wrong impression. Our coworkers or our supervisors may think, well, they're just not engaged. They're not trying to resolve this. So obviously they just don't care. They're not engaged, and this could cause a bad reputation, negative thoughts. It can even lead to other conflict. So that might be a time when in avoidance could, if we utilized it and it may be appropriate, it could also cause some issues, some misunderstanding. So if we do utilize it, then what communication do we want to use? What do we want to say? How do we want to say it so that the wrong impression won't be left with someone because we're not engaging in that conflict in a way to manage it at the moment. The other thing that can come with utilizing avoidance as a conflict management type is our emotions, our feelings, our needs may end up being compromised if we choose not to have those addressed at the moment. And this we see many times in individuals who are really their personality is such that they are conflict avoidant. They just don't feel comfortable standing up to individuals. They don't feel comfortable stating their needs and desires for whatever reason. So this could lead to some negative consequences, and it could also lead, to a lot of negative feelings towards whomever they are in conflict with later on down the road. And it could additionally cause stress for the individual and cause physical health problems and psychological health problems in the long run as well. Accommodation is another one of the 5 conflict management styles. So we have some examples here of when to use them and when not to use them. So with accommodation, accommodation is where, really one person's needs and desires and wants are being met at a far greater rate than the other person's is because they may be accommodating. We will do this when the relationship matters more than whatever the issue is at the time. Whatever the conflict is, it's a conflict. Yes, we acknowledge it's a conflict, but we will accommodate their needs because we value the relationship more than the outcome in our favor in this particular situation. So we have to weigh the conflict versus the relationship. Which do we value more? Which is most important to us? If the timing is bad, we may just say, yeah, you go ahead, whatever you think, that's fine. You go ahead and handle it the way you want, and I'll go along with it, because it may be a time in our lives where we just don't have the capability or the ability or the resources to manage the conflict in a way that would be a win for us, or a win for us and a win for them, the win-win situation. The other thing may be that common ground matters more than the differences. So let's say that we are in conflict with someone, and but during that time, even though we do have differences of opinion, we are able to find some commonality. And so we kind of negotiate a resolution. And if we are accommodating, then I'm giving in a little bit. Maybe I'm giving a little bit more than he is giving. So it's more of an accommodation to come to that resolution. Sometimes when it would not be in the best interest to use accommodation as a conflict resolution resolution style is if my needs, let's say that I am in conflict with my husband, and I wouldn't want to use accommodation if it's a situation where my needs are not being addressed at all. Or when, it could cause me to lose credibility if I accommodate. So it's going to depend on the particular situation. And with the last thing that I noted, the lose credibility or influence if you use accommodation, we may see that a lot with our leaders, whether it be in the political realm, whether it be our supervisors. We often will see that if they accommodate, then maybe the perception is, well, they're weak. They couldn't stand up to this issue or to this other individual, so it makes them look weak. And in doing that, we lose some credibility. Again, it's going to depend on the particular situation and the individuals that are involved. Competition is another one of the 5 ways that we manage conflict. There are times that we can use it, and there are also some consequences that could arise. So let's say there's a competition and we need an answer right now. So we've got to make a quick decision. All right. So we use competition to make a quick decision. But if we make that quick decision without fully thinking things through, then there could be a negative outcome from it because we didn't take the time to fully think it through. Or let's say that I am in conflict with with someone, and their personality is so strong, it's more of an authoritative or a dictative personality type, and they're, we're in conflict and we're competing against one another, but their personality is so overbearing that it kind of, I kind of give in, I kind of give up. I try to compete with them, but I can't compete with that overbearing personality type. Or there may be a situation where you're in a disagreement, in a conflict, and that issue really and truly matters, and your opinion really and truly matters, um, or your resolution really, really matters. Well, instead of accommodating, or instead of avoiding it, you're going to be right there competing, trying to get your opinion across, kind of going head to head with the other person or the other organization or group of people that are involved in it. You're competing with it. So because it really matters that much to you. Um, and sometimes in those situations, the issue may not get resolved at all. That's one of the consequences of it. If people are competing constantly and unable to look at things differently, or to step back, if those emotions get involved, it may be a situation where it's a conflict, but the conflict is never really truly resolved. So compromise. When we think of compromise, we may just think, well, I'm just going to give up if I compromise. So do I really want to be known as a quitter? Do I really want to give in, to give up if I'm compromising? But compromising may be that, but generally speaking, it isn't that. Um, whenever when we want to use compromise, we might want to use it when you have two people of equal status. Let's say you have two coworkers, maybe they're in management, and there's a situation and they have a disagreement over how it should be resolved. Well, perhaps they're able to say, okay, well, I'll give in a little bit, you give in a little bit, and we'll come to a resolution, and the scales are kind of even there. Maybe there are so many people involved in the conflict that somebody's going to have to compromise. Somebody's going to have to give in, because you may not be able to satisfy everybody. I can see this happening in a family situation where there may be a conflict about budgeting. I could see this happening in an organization where there is a change that's coming about and it has to be. We'll take, for instance, behavioral health and Medicaid. There are always changes that are coming down, and we have to implement those changes that's working in the system. So maybe we have to compromise something on our end to be able to implement them. So compromise, it isn't always necessarily a negative thing. If it can help us come to a positive resolution, then it may be the most appropriate of the techniques to use at the time. But if the outcome is flexible and that flexibility won't cause any harm, then perhaps compromise again would be the best of the techniques to use. Let's talk a little bit about the consequences of compromise when we should not use them. If it undermines our values or our long-term goals, then again, for the same reasons we mentioned earlier, we shouldn't compromise. If the conflict demand is too high, too great of a demand, then it would not be wise for us to compromise. An abusive situation, it would not be in our best interest to compromise to allow the person to continue abusing us without trying to get out of it, out of the abusive situation. And when I say allowing the person, I don't mean that we are, basically saying, okay, continue abusing me. I'm saying that when we compromise to such that all the power is in the hands of the abuser, and little, if any, power is in the hand of the individual who is being abused. So compromise could put us in a dangerous situation at that point in time. If someone is trying to manipulate us, then trying to compromise ourselves and our needs may not create a solution to the conflict that would be in our best interest either. And if we are a parent or we are a manager of some sort, and we compromise with a child or we compromise with a staff individual, would this create some sort of inconsistency? And we know how important that consistency is in parenting, especially in management too, but especially in parenting. Collaboration. Collaboration, we want to foster trust, a relationship of trust, not a relationship of fear. So when we collaborate, we're kind of using that you give a little bit, I give a little bit. I remember years ago, I was taking a class under an attorney, and the attorney was talking about case resolution, and his comment that really stuck with me was, well, when we go to court, I feel like that if everybody involved with the case walks out of there a little bit disappointed, where they didn't get everything that they wanted, then it was probably the right resolution. And that kind of boils down to collaboration. It's where people are coming together and they're working to have a positive outcome to a conflict, and that outcome, neither party is going to get 100% of what they want. It's it's kind of a negotiation. All parties involved give a little bit in order to get a good outcome. But in doing that, there needs to be that high level of trust again. There needs to be shared responsibility. If it's a group situation, we need to have the group buy-in with it. And everybody involved may have to change just a little bit because, again, no one gets everything that they want. And there may be, with a conflict, there may be negative feelings that that must be worked through by the parties that are involved in order to be able to reach that collaborative resolution to the conflict. Again, we have to be mindful of our communication. We have to be mindful of our emotions and kind of keep those in check. Maybe we need to, step back and take a breath and calm down. Some of the consequences of collaboration: there can be a lot of back and forth, and it can take a lot of energy, and it can take some substantial time, but the outcome that's achieved will most likely be worth it. I would hope that it would be worth it. And we do need to create and have and maintain that trust and that openness. But we also need to be mindful to make sure that we're not being manipulated, or that our trustfulness and openness is not being taken advantage of. So we have to be cautious when we're using collaboration, because sometimes people will try to take advantage of us. So anytime that there is a conflict and we're trying to manage it, we need to take a moment, just kind of take a breath, step back, and we need to ask ourselves, is this particular conflict really important Is it important enough for us to engage in? And can I change the conflict? Can I change the outcome if I engage in the conflict? Is it a conflict that I need to be involved in? So we need to ask ourselves these as we move forward and before we begin utilizing any of the previous techniques that we talked about. So there are some challenges with conflict resolution. And so let's go through those and take a look at them. The main thing we want to be is solution focused. When we enter into conflict resolution and conflict management, we want to look at the solution. If we get stuck looking at the conflict, the particular issue, and looking at that only, then we could just get stuck there and it not be resolved, or other issues could be created. So when we go into this, we need to go into it with the mindset of being solution focused. What is the goal? What goal do I want? What goal does the other people involved want? What is the outcome? Does the outcome seem fair and equitable and achievable? So let's kind of think of those questions before we go into it. Then let's take a breath because we need to stay calm, okay? And when we listen, we need to listen to hear, not listen to respond. I think Stephen Covey said that in some of his trainings. Listen to hear, not to respond, because if we listen to respond, then we're not truly hearing and taking in everything that the individual is saying. And therefore, we don't know what their full issue is or what their outcome is because we haven't truly paid attention. We need to be mindful of things that trigger us. Because if we are triggered and we're not able to control that, then our emotions are going to become a factor and it's going to make conflict resolution that much more challenging. So again, we have to be respectful of ourselves and respectful of everyone involved. And we have to make sure that we are being respected as well. So those are some of the challenges. As you can see here, respect the dignity and essential worth of all individuals. That needs to stay at the forefront. Respect, respect, respect. I can't say that enough in conflict management. You know, while we're trying to manage this and we're engaging, maybe we need to slow down the process. You know, maybe there's like a competition going on and we just need to kind of slow it down a little bit. We need to know what the true conflict is. Perhaps there's so many things going back and forth. Maybe there's like 3 or 4 different conflicts, but you have one major issue at hand and it's causing these other conflicts to stem from it. So what is the true conflict? What do we truly need a solution for? Okay? Then in doing that, let's state what it is that we want. Let's state what our needs are, okay? Because we have to get those out front. If we don't make them known, then there's no way that we can work towards a solution that would be amicable to us as well. Validating others. If we listen and truly listen, then we'll hear what the conversation is. And even though we may not agree with the conflict, with the issue, we should at least validate that this is an issue for the other person and they are truly bothered by it. And being able to validate that for them will go a long way in de-escalating the situation, a very long way. That mutuality, our respecting each other's issues, respecting each other's time, respecting each other's efforts. let's work together and brainstorm for a solution. So we said we want to be solution focused, okay? But it's not just my solution, it's the other person's solution too. So let's brainstorm and figure out how the best way to resolve this issue is, okay? Once we've done that, then let's choose what the solution is going to be, and let's figure out a plan, a strategy to be able to achieve that, okay? And we may want to evaluate that solution. There may be criteria that we want that solution to meet to make sure that it is the appropriate solution. And then again, let's be respectful. Let's develop that strategic plan for the appropriate resolution. Ways to de-escalate the conflict. We need to know those fair fighting rules, right? So we want to be fair, and we want others to be fair to us in the resolution of any conflict at all. Showing that respect, being polite, using the I statements, maintaining a positive and open body language, making sure that we are listening, making sure we're giving the person our full undivided attention and that we're present during the entire conversation. We don't want to attack people. We don't want to call people names, because that's only going to escalate the emotions that are already there. It's going to escalate everything. Maybe we need to agree to disagree. Okay? I think that happens a lot when people are talking about politics and religion. Being respectful to the other person, validating, but agreeing to disagree. Okay? More ways to de-escalate a conflict. When there is a conflict between, let's say, two people, let's not go out here and talk about the other person behind their back and try to bring other people into the conflict. Let's address the conflict one-on-one and work through it. Because if we bring others in, then it's just going to escalate the entire situation. Take responsibility for ourselves. Take responsibility for our behavior, our tone, our words, our body language, anything that we need to do to any of the steps to resolve the conflict, making sure that we're holding up our end. And also realize that just because we're going to talk about the conflict, it doesn't mean that we are obligated to make any kind of a change. We're in a discussion for it, trying to resolve it. Depending upon what the conflict is, we may or may not want to make the change. We may or may not be able. If we can't, make the change, maybe there's another alternative that we can suggest. It's always open for conversation. I really certainly do appreciate your time today. I hope that you have found this to be of value to you. And my name is Carol Senick. I work with Alliance Health, and I can be reached at area code 980-677-4262, excuse me. Or my email address is csennick@alliancehealthplan.org. Please feel free to reach out to me should you have any questions or concerns. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.